Today's Daf Bezos Hashem is Masechta Horayos Daf Dalid number 4, and we will begin on Daf Gimel Amid Beis by the Mishnah. Okay, here we go. So the Mishnah says like this: Haru Bezdin, if the Bezdin made a psak, v'yadu shuto, and then they realized they made a mistake, and most of the tzibur followed their mistake. V'chazu behem, and they retracted. But somebody did not hear about it. Okay. Bein sheviu kaparasim, whether they brought the cow, bein shelo heviu kaparasim, and whether they didn't bring the cow, but they announced, "Hey, we made a mistake, and we're retracting our psak." V'holach v'asa al piyim, and one person who did not hear what's going on in Bezdin, he's still following the initial order of Bezdin that whatever they said was permitted. Rab Shimon Paiter. Rab Shimon says, nevertheless, he is potter from bringing his own carbon chatas, because he's relying still, although Bezdin retracted, he's still relying on the Bezdin. And therefore, when you're relying on the Bezdin, you're potter from your own personal chatas. Rab Laza says, suffix. You have to bring an Asham Toli. Rab Laza says he's not so convinced that the guy is relying on Bezdin. He um, he really should have made some inquiries whether Bezdin is still upholding their psak. Therefore he's not living under a rock. So I'm not sure if he's relying on Bezdin, he's not relying on Bezdin. So there's a special carbon called an osham tolui, a osham that you bring when you're not sure so you did an aver or not. So there's like a protective type of carbon, and that's what Rabbi Lazar holds. Ezahu suffix. What makes a person a suffix? Even Kon Rab Lazar, we're not sure if he relied on Bezdin or not. Yashav loy b'seich beisai. If he was sitting in his house and he could have inquired whether Bezdin retracted their psak or not, so then he's chayev to bring a carbon ashim tolui. Because I'm not sure. Maybe he just is relying on his own psak, his own personal psak, and he's chayiv to bring the carbon chatas. I'm not, or he might be relying on Bezdin. But holach loy lemedina siyam. Let's say he traveled out of the country, so for sure he heard the initial psak of Bezdin, and then he left. So he had no way of knowing if Bezdin retracted or not. So if he did the avera, Potter, then for sure he was relying on Bezdin, and he's Potter from bringing carbon chatas and Potter from a Oshim Toli. So that makes perfect sense. Alma Rabbi Kiva says, Moide ani I agree that this is a good idea that if he traveled out of the country, Shukarv lifter minachayva, that he is more exempt from bringing a carbon chatas than an obligation to bring an Oshim Toli. Alma loy Ben Azai. So Ben Azai says, Maishno zeh min hayoshe b'seisei. Ben Azai was questioning Rabbi Akiva. He says, why is that different than somebody who sits in his house that you say he's obligated to bring a carbon oshantoli? And Rabbi Akiva, you say that if he left to another country, he is potter from bringing a carbon oshantoli. So Rabbi Akiva explained to him, when he sits in his home, he could have heard, it's possible that he heard that Bezdin retracted or wasn't sure. So therefore, when he did the Avera, it's possible he did it on his own mistake, not because he relied on Bezdin. And because of that, therefore, he may not be obligated to bring a personal carbon chatas, but he should at least bring a carbon ashum tali. But somebody who traveled and left the country, there was no way he could have heard what Bezdin's retracting. And therefore, when he did the Avera in another country, he was probably relying on the psak of Bezdin. And therefore, he's totally exempt from his personal karbachatas. And in addition, he's also exempt from an Ashim Toli. Now, the Gemara is going to explain that this is Ben Azai didn't need this simple explanation of Rabbi Akiva because it's pretty obvious. But what Rabbi Kiva meant to say is that even if he did not yet leave the country, and he's on the road. He's, let's say, just packed up his station wagon to leave the country. We consider him as if he left the country, and if he did the avera, he's still considered to be relying on Bezdin since his mind is leaving the country. However, Rabbi Nazi says as long as he did not physically leave the country, then he should be required to bring an Asham Tali. That would be the machlokes between Ben Azai and Rabbi Akiva. Says the Mishnah, a new topic. Hoyru Bezdin la'akas kol haguf. Let's say Bezdin said there is no such a mitzvah in the Torah. Amru, they said a nida b'Torah. There's no mitzvah of nida. Ain't Shabbos b'Torah. There's no Shabbos in the Torah. Ain't avodah zarah b'Torah. There's no avodah zarah in the Torah. So they uprooted a whole mitzvah, one of the 613. Harei Peturim, they're potter from bringing a carbon par helam davar shatziba. That's not of the psak that we're talking about. Let's say they agree to the mitzvah, but they want to nullify and uproot part of the mitzvah. That's when you bring a par helam davar shatziba. Kate said, what would be the case? Amru, if the Bezdin said, Yesh nida b'Torah, there is nida b'Torah, aval bo'al shemeres yavim keneged yom, if you're a minor nida, a minor zava, if you have relations with a minor zava, we'll explain that in the Gemara, Potter, you're exempt from then you're exempt, if that's what their psak is. So they agree to the concept of nida, but they don't agree to the concept of a minor zava. Or here's more common. Yesh Shabbos b'Torah. They say there's Shabbos in the Torah. They agree to that. Aval hamoitzi rishus l'rishus yachid l'rishus rabim potter. If the Bezdin says that if you carry on Shabbos, then you're exempt. So that is a psak of Bezdin that would require them to bring a par helam davar shatzibur. Same idea. Yesh avodah b'zar b'Torah. They say there is a concept of avodah zar in the Torah. But if you bow to an avodah zara potter, you're exempt. So that's these cases are a case where Bezdin paskin, but they didn't uproot something in the Torah. They agreed to the concept of the Torah. They just said this halacha doesn't work, or this part of the din is permitted. So then, if they make that mistake, they're chayiv a par helam davar shiba. Shenema, because the pasuk says v'nelam davar. It's a funny way we're going to make this. They forgot me davar. We put the mem that says v'nelam as if it says like with a dagesh. You say as if it says two davar. Nelam. They ignored me davar from part of a mitzvah. Davar v'loy kol haguf. They didn't. It means they forgot part of a mitzvah, but not the entire mitzvah. Now the Gemara goes back to the first part of the Mishnah. See, the Mishnah had two topics over here. Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav, Yehuda said in the name of Rav. My Talmud Rab Shimon. Why is this? Rab Shimon says that if someone did the Avera after Bezdin retracted from their psak, why doesn't he have to bring his own personal carbon chatas? Answers the Gemara, Hoil ureshus Bezdin hu oisa. Since he did it he's still relying on Bezdin. Others say, Amar Yehuda, Amar Rav, Amar Rab Shimon. If already a psak, most of the tzibur followed the psak of Bezdin, Yachid ha'oisa, if the individual who followed the psak after the Bezdin retracted, potter, he would also be potter from his own personal carbon chatas. Once we have a psak of Bezdin, that determines that the person's doing it by mistake because he's relying on Bezdin. So that's the what the Gemara says. Meisvei. So the Gemara asks a question: how could a guy not know that Bezin retracted? That's the Gemara's question. How could a guy not know? By avodah zara, if the Bezdin makes a mistake of avodah zara, they have to actually make a new collection, or a par helam davar shatzibar, a regular par helam davar shatzira. So they make a new assessment. So they went around collecting and notifying everybody, Bezdin made a mistake. We have to collect a little money to buy these carbons. So they make a new assessment. So by going around collecting again, everybody must have known that Bezdin retracted. So how could you say that the guy was relying on Bezdin? Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's from the original collection that they made in Adar. From the original collection, they don't make a new collection. So Amai. So the question is, Kivan the Gavale. So the question is against Rabbi Shimon. Since they made a new collection, Havale Haida, he should have known that Bezdin retracted. And so the Gemara, I can say, Stam. When they made the new collection, they didn't say what they're making the collection for. They knocked on the guy's door and says, Bezdin's making a collection. So he had no idea that they retracted their psak. Or when they Bezdin made the collection for the monies for the Par Helam Dovish Tzibah, he was not home. He wasn't in the city. If you want, I can tell you. Rav ki idich Tana Sova, the Tanya Ipchop. Rav held that Rab Shimon didn't say you make a new collection. Rab Shimon and Rabbi Yehuda's positions are reversed. The Tanya Ipchop. Rabbi Yehuda says you make a brand new collection. Rab Shimon Rab Shimon says that it was brought from the old collection. So Rab Shimon was of the opinion that did not make a new collection. Because of that, therefore, it was impossible for the person to know that Bezdin retracted. So even if they did retract, he probably is still relying on Bezdin. Therefore, he is exempt from his own personal chatas. Tana we learned in the Mishnah. Tana we learned in the Brisa. Rameir Mechayev. Rameir says you're chayav a carbon chatas. Rab Shimon Paiter. Rab Shimon says you're potter from a carbon chatas. Rab Leza is Safik. Rab Leza says you bring a carbon osham tali. Mishum Sumcha Samri. And Sumcha says tolui. Basically, we're going to learn Rab Shimon agrees with Rab Shimon that you don't have to bring a carbon osham tolui because you can rely. He's probably still relying somewhat on Bezdin and not on his own volition. That's how Simchas is going to learn. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan Ashim Tali Ika Benayu. That's the difference. Simchas doesn't agree that you bring an Ashim Tali. He's just another way of phrasing it that he agrees with Rab Shimon. Rab Lazu, who says Safik, he says you bring an Ashim Tali. Amar Rab Zera said, Marshal the Rab Laza Lamaha Davadaima. What is Rab Laza compared to? Then why do you bring an Ashim Tali? A person, he didn't know, he has a piece of meat in front of him. He doesn't know if it's the fats or not. He thinks he's eating kosher meat. And then he ate it. But now they told him it might have possibly been non-kosher. So therefore, he doesn't know if he ate non-kosher or not. Shemay be Asham, then he brings a carbon Asham. It's an unclear that he did an Aveira. That's the example. So here we're unclear if the person did an Aveira. We don't know if he relied on his own volition, so he should bring the carbon chatas, or he was relying on Bezdin. That's why Rab Lezer holds you bring a carbon oila. And it doesn't matter that they made a new collection. Not only that, even if it's the congregation that chips in to buy a carbon, that everybody, so if the congregation's chipping in, he probably knows about it. Nevertheless, Rab Shimon, Rab Shimon says you bring an Asham Tali. Rab Lezer says you bring an Asham Tali. Even if, according to the opinion that says the par is not even a collection, Bezdin collects from the 71 people, and they bring the par Helam Dovash Atziva. So probably there's a good reason he didn't hear about it. He still has to bring an Asham Tali because I have a shol, have amrle. He could have asked, and they would have told him that Bezdin retracted. So, once you're living in the city and once you're around, and Bezdin made a questionable psak, you always have to investigate. Maybe they retracted their psak. So if he violated it, it could be that he had a funny feeling that Bezdin is going to retract their psak. He had a funny feeling, but he didn't investigate further. So when he did the Aveira, it's possible he's doing it on his own volition. And therefore, he would be chayiv a carbon chatas. So therefore, we're not sure if he's chayiv a carbon chatas or he was still relying on Bezdin. And because of that, Rab Lezer says, you bring an Ashim Tali. What is Sumchas compared to? Sumchas says you don't bring an Asham Tali, but he still says the guy, we are unsure of what the person had in mind when he did the Aveira. la'odam to a person. Shehevi kaparasa ben hashmashas. He brought, let's say, a carbon chatas. A person who was required to bring a carbon chatas. Let's say he was Michal Shabbos, and he was required to bring a carbon chatas. And really, he came into the base of Migdash after the carbon tamid, and b'di Eved, he brought his carbon chatas. But the problem was it wasn't daylight anymore. It was after Shkia, Bein Hashmashos during twilight. Twilight is already not sure if it's daytime still, or it's considered nighttime and the carbon is invalid. You don't bring an Asham Tali in that case because he actually brought a carbon. So we're going to assume that he had some sort of kapara, even though we're not sure if he got the kapara or not kapara. It's not a doubt that he did an avera. So and he should have known about it. If the tzibur made a collection, he should have known about it, and therefore, when he did the avera, he did it on his own volition. Still, he doesn't have to bring a carbon asham tali. It's similar like the case where a person brings a carbon chatas, not sure if it's daytime or nighttime. There's no one who can really answer that question. Maybe the way Sumchus understands it is that maybe he couldn't have asked the question if Bezdin retracted because nobody would have answered him. Maybe there was no one around when he did the Avera, so he could ask the question if Bezdin retracted it. So it's most likely, it's most likely he was doing the Avera relying on the Psaka Bezdin, not so much on his own volition. And that's why Reb Sumchus held, according to Sumchus, you don't bring the carbon Ashim Tali. So because he was still relying on the Bezdin, and therefore you don't bring anything. You potter from your own carbon chatas, and you don't have to bring an ashram tali. It's only Reb Lezer who says, no, you should bring an ashram tali because there's a strong possibility that you were still relying on your own volition. Du Gemara. What was Ben Azai thinking, saying that even if a person is at home, even if a person's on the road, even if a person's on the road, he should have found out what's happening in Besdin. I mean, it's obvious. If he's not in the country, how could he have found out if Besdin retracted? Amar Rava says no. Ben Azi was discussing Hechse B'derech Ika Benayo. If between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Azai, the discussion was whether if a guy started packing his station wagon and he started to go out on the road, it was his intention of leaving the country. So since his intention is leaving the country, Rabbi Akiva says he's not going to ask Bezdin because he's thinking that he's traveling. And if he did the Avera, even while he was still in the country of Israel, he's chayev. But Ben Azai chayev, even if he did it, according to you, he'll be potter because he's still relying on Bezdin. The Ben Azai chayev, according to Ben Azai, you'll be obligated to bring your own carbon chatas. You're still in your own house. Rabbi Kiva potter, Rabbi Kiva will say you're potter to bring a carbon chatas because you're still considered relying on Bezdin. Because you started out on the road, and therefore you're not investigating whether Bezdin retracted their psak or not. So here's this Bryce is going to repeat the Mishnah that if Bezdin uprooted an entire mitzvah, that's not the idea of par helam davar shel tzibar, because that's so obvious. Tarabonim v'nelem davar v'loish yaka kol mitzvah kula. Ketzad Amru Einida B'Torah and Shabbos B'Torah and Avodah Zarah B'Torah Yochel Yehei Chayavim Talmud Lo Mevnelam Davav Lo Shesal Mitzvah Kula Harei Peturin. It's if they say there's no need to know Avodah Zarah and no Shabbos. Of course, I would have thought that they'll be obligated to bring the Par Helam Davav Shatzibar. The pasuk says no. Bezdin has to make a mistake within a mitzvah that they agree to the mitzvah, but they say, oh, one aspect of the mitzvah doesn't apply. For example, if they say yesh Shabbos b'Torah, aval moitzim shus yachal shus rabim potter, yesh avodah zarah b'Torah, aval mishtachve potter, yachal yepetur tamad loy mavenel davar kol aguf. So they have to agree to the concept of the mitzvah, but not uproot the entire mitzvah. So the Gemara is going to explain. Amamar, we said before, Yochel Yehei Peturin. I would have thought that they're going to be required, they're going to be potter. What does that mean? That if they uproot part of a mitzvah, and if they uproot a whole mitzvah, I would think that there's no power, Helam Dava Shotziba. So the Gemara asked the question, the Ibikia mixes or bitul mixes Peturin. The Akira is called Guf Peturin. If they uproot an entire mitzvah, they're exempt from par helam davar shotziba. And the Brisa has a havamina that even if they mavatal part of a mitzvah, they're potter from par helam davar shotziba. When would Bezin ever be chayiv in a par helam davar shotziba? So the Gemara says that was never the problem. Tanya hochika kashle. Ema dava kula bilsa b'mashmal. The Gemara's question was that maybe if they uprooted an entire mitzvah, they would be obligated in the power to helm davar shotziba. Talmud loyma. That's why the pasuk says v'nelam davar. They forgot a mitzvah, part of a mitzvah. My mashma. How do you see that? V'nelam davar means they forgot the entire mitzvah. Amaula kribi v'nelam davar. I meant to put it over here. You put the mem mi davar as if it says v'nelam mi davar, as if it says a double mem. They forgot midavar, part of a mitzvah. Chizkiya says, Amakra, the pasuk says, well, also achas mikol mitzvahs. They violated part of a mitzvah. Mikol mitzvah, like kol mitzvah. They invited part of a mitzvah, not the entire mitzvah. Says the Gemara, mitzvahs tartim mashma. Doesn't mitzvahs means they forgot two mitzvahs, part of two mitzvahs. Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak, mitzvahs kesiv. It says mitzvahs with one vav, not with two, not with a chaylim. So therefore, it's as if it says mitzvahs, and the pasuk describes they forgot part of a mitzvah. By the way, I'm just going to bring up the pasuk over here as we did it yesterday. The Imkol Adas Yisrael Yishkuf, the entire Bezdin forgot the Nelam Dava, and it was hidden. Many Akol Va'asu Achas Mikol mitzvahs, and they told the Jewish people violated part of one of the mitzvahs. So v'nelam davar, the first way to darshan it, v'nelam davar means v'nelam mei davar, and the other way to darshan it, ve'echas mikol mitzvah, is part of a mitzvah. Ravashi says, Yolef davar davar mizakim mamre. You have Gzer Shava davar davar from zakin mamre, a person who refuses to listen to Bezdin. Ksivbei b'zakim mamre. It says by somebody who refuses to listen to Bezdin, ki pali davar l'susim min hadavar shigidu l'cha yaminu small. Mamram min adavav like called davar, apaira davav like called guf. So something by a zakin mamre, he has to not listen to Bezdin when they paskin regarding part of a mitzvah. Not if he goes ahead and tells his people, oh, you don't have to do a particular mitzvah. So also b'hayra, when it comes to Bezdin par helim davar tzibor, means that Bezdin paskin regarding part of a mitzvah that you don't have to do, but then it's not talking about when Bezdin uprooted an entire mitzvah. Basically, when they uproot an entire mitzvah, it's not even a mistake because it's written in the Chumash. And even if you just learn Bible straight, like a Tzeduki, you would agree to that concept. So it's not something benelam. It's not something that you can even, I would think you could even make a mistake on that. So the Gemara says like this. And the Gemara discusses. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Mishmuel. Ein bezin chayaven achyer v'dava she'ein atzdukin moedemai. The way to remember it, bezin's not obligated chayav a carbon power helam dava shotzibar until they paskin in something that even the tzedukim, if you're a Bible reader, you don't agree to that halacha. Aval b'dava she'tzedukim moedemai. If they deny something that even a Bible reader would agree to. Peturim. For example, if they say there's no Shabbos, even a Bible reader says it clearly says Shabbos in the Torah. So then Bezdin would not be required to, if they said that was their psak, there's no Shabbos, then they wouldn't be obligated to bring a par helim dava tzitziba. My tamo zil korei be'ravhu. Just read the Chumash. If you read the Chumash, it says keep Shabbos. So how could Bezdin make such a mistake? Tanan. Yish nida b'Torah aval ba al shemeres yom keneg yom potter. If they say there's a katz of nida in the Torah, a nida, let's call it a zava. A zava means you saw blood for 3 special days. then a woman would have to bring a carbon. And there the Torah says you can't have relations with a Zava Gedola, a major Zava. But if the Bezdin would say that if you have a minor Zava saw blood 1 day or 2 days, so such a woman would not have to wait 7 days to become pure. Just watch 1 day of purity and she becomes pure. That's called Shemeris Yom. She watches 1 day with no blood to correspond to the days that she did see blood. So if they say that you can have relations with such a woman, then if they say you could have relations with such a woman, mutter, that should be mutter, you're permitted to have relations with such a woman. If Bezdin said that, so they're not uprooting the concept of Zav in the Torah, but what they're doing is saying that there's certain aspect of Zava, minor Zava, there's no prohibition to have relations with such a woman. If so, um, so now the question is, Va'amai, isn't that uprooting something in the Torah? Shemeres Yom Kineged Yom Haksiv. The Torah says, do not have relations with a minor Zava, because the pasuk says, V'safar la, she has to count a pure day. So how could the Bezdin say, Balamit Sheseferes Echad Echad? She counts 1 day of purity, of not seeing blood. So the Torah does say by the minor Zava, you're not supposed to have relations. Answers the Gemara, the Amri, because the Bezdin said, Haroi Shaya, Gemar Bira, Huda Asira. Initial penetration is permitted. They just said that only the Torah meant to say is that a complete intercourse is asr, and ha'ara, we're going to use that word, and initial penetration is permitted. That's what they said. Says the Gemara, Hanamiksiv, the Pasuk also says, anytime you have relations with an arayis, even hara'a is asr. Es mekayre hera. The Torah does say that. Okay, so the Gemara says the Amrim, because Bezdin said b'darka asira, if you do normal relations, it's asr. Shaloi kedarka sharia, if you go on the backside, so in the not normal fashion, that's permitted. If that's what the Bezdin said, Oksiv, that's also written in the Chumash. Mishkevei isha, there are 2 ways to have relations with a woman, one through the front, one through the back. Okay, so the Amri, the Bezdin said, Kedarka asa afila hara. They said that darka is in the normal way, it's also even with hara. B'shaloi kedarka, if you go in the not normal fashion, Gamar biyahu da asar aval hara shari. They said that initial hara is permitted on a shaloi kedarka. If that's what they said, so why does the Brisa say, or the Mishnah says, that they only said that regarding a minor zava? They should say that regarding a regular nida. They could have said that. A regular arayas. They could have said, if you do shloi kedarka, shara is permitted. Really, we're talking about you having relations in the normal fashion. Uda Amri, what Bezdin really said, hara be'isha hara be'isha dava. What they basically said is that when does the Torah require um, when does the Torah say that hara, initial penetrations asur, is if you're a regular nida, because the pasuk says dava, you're a flowing nida, but a shemeres yom where you're not flowing nida, you're just a 1 day blood, so a minor zava. So then could be that the Chumash doesn't, it's not also to do our raw. And that's what Bezdin made the mistake. Diba said, if you want, I can say you, the Bezdin made a mistake. The Amra, Zava lehavel be mama, the Ksiv kol yimei zova. Basically, they said that you're not a Zava unless you see by daytime, not if you see at nighttime. So they made such a type of mistake. Now we go in the further. Tanan. Yesh Shabbos b'toif. Bezdin said there is Shabbos. Aval moitzi mishus l'shus pater. For they said you're allowed to carry on Shabbos. If that, then that's a mistake of Bezdin. V'amai hoitzah haksiva. The Torah says you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. Loisasiyu ma'asim in b'teichem. So what kind of mistake could they have made? It's obvious. It's written in the Torah or al yetzi ishmim koimoi, other psukim that say you're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. So how could they have made such a mistake? And you told me that if it's written in the Chumash, that's not considered a mistake. And says the Gemara, the Amro, they said, the Torah says you're not allowed to carry, mutter, but you're allowed to carry from the street into your house. If you want, I can tell you, the mistake of Bezdin was, the Amro, they said you're not allowed to carry. But Moshe V'Zorek, sorry, but you're allowed to throw or extend from your inside your house to somebody who's on the outside, and put it outside your house. But you're standing in your house. So that was the mistake of Bezdin. Again, not uprooting something that's written in the Chumash. Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah. How Yesh Avodah Zarah Hamashtach v'Pater. The example that the Mishnah says that they said is Avodah Zarah, but if you bow to the Avodah Zarah, that's permitted. Svamai. How could the Bezdin make such a mistake? The Torah says, don't bow to Avodah Zarah. Don't bow to an Avodah Zarah. Answers the Gemara, the Amri Bezdin said, Ki asirish tachavo kedarka. Avashloi kedarka shari. Bezdin said that if it's a type of avodah zarah that you serve it normally with bowing, then you're not allowed to bow. But if it's a avodah zarah that this bowing is not part of its service, like markulis, where you just throw stones at that avodah zarah, and they said for that avodah zarah you're allowed to bow, which is not true. And if they said that, that's called a mistake of Bezdin. That's not written in the Torah. The Ibayisem, if you want, I can say that the Bezdin's mistake was they said you're not allowed to bow to any avodah zarah, but the isli be pishit yadayim raglayim. They said that the only bowing that's us in the Torah is if you totally prostrate yourself with your hands and feet on the floor in front of the avodah zarah. But if they said you could bow, but you don't, but to an avodah zarah, if you don't spread your hands and feet out, if they said that's permitted, so that's also called a mistake of Bezdin, but it's really not written in the Chumash. It's not so clear in the Chumash. That's a mistake of Bezdin where you would bring a par helam davar shatzibar. Now we go to Dalet Amebez. Boy Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef had a question. What happens if Bezdin says ein charisha b'Shabbos? You're not allowed to plow on Shabbos. So they're not uprooting the Shabbos. They're just saying one of the Dalet Lamates Malachas are permitted. Mahu. Is that considered? Mi amin and kivin de komoide bekulam milsas, they agree on the concept of Shabbos. Kibitel mitzvah ki mitzvah. It's as if they're keeping part of the mitzvahs or not. Or Dilmore, maybe, kivin de ko akrin lecharisha kol ikar ka'akiras guf damya. Since they're saying that there is no plowing in Shabbos, that there is no such a thing of plowing being usher in Shabbos, it's as if they're uprooting an entire mitzvah. Do you consider it like they're uprooting Shabbos? Or maybe, since they're agreeing in the Shabbos, they're just saying one of the Lamates Malachas are permitted. So, Tashma, come in here. Yesh nida b'Torah, aval haba shemeres yoim keneged yoim pater. Va'amai ha'akrin l'shemeres yoim keneged yoim kol ikar. The Gemara said that didn't one of the examples of the Mishnah was that they said there's nida, but they said that a minor zara you're permitted to have relations with. Isn't that uprooting something of the concept of zava katana from the Torah that you're allowed to have relations? That's like the teretz we answered. It's not that they're uprooting shemeres yom keneged yom. They say you're not allowed to have relations with a shemeres yom keneged yom, but what a minor zava. But what they're basically saying is that you're not a zava until you see during the daytime. So they agree to that. You see, what the Gemara is saying over here is maybe what would be considered to be, if they say there's no plowing in the Torah, then that's called uprooting the whole Torah on Shabbos. If they say there's no such a thing of plowing on Shabbos, so that's called uprooting the concept of plowing on Shabbos. But what happens if they say this is not called plowing? When you're schlepping a chair, that's not plowing. So that would be the mistake. Toshma, come in here. Shabbos b'Torah. Aval moitz mishus yachid l'shus yabim bota va'amai ha'akron leitzar kolikar. Here, it's clearly when they say that you're allowed to carry on Shabbos, so aren't they uprooting the concept, one of the Dalamates Malachas of carrying on Shabbos? So wouldn't that resolve our question? And says the Gemara, Hasam now Mekidashinim. They're not uprooting the concept of carrying on Shabbos. They agree carrying on Shabbos is asur. But we answered that what the Bezdin is saying is you're allowed to throw something from your Rishus to a Rishus Harabim on Shabbos. Tashma yesh avodah zarah b'Torah m'shtachav v'pata. They said there is concept of avodah zarah, but if you bow to avodah zarah, you're exempt. Va'amai or va'amai va'akal m'shtachav v'kol ikar. Aren't they uprooting the concept of bowing? if they're agreeing to bowing, but they're uprooting one part of avodah zarah. Amrei hashtachavon nama kiddushinim. That what the Mishnah meant is that they agreed to the concept of bowing, but the question was that Bezdin uprooted and said this is not called bowing. So the Gemara does not resolve our question. The Gemara's question started off if the Bezdin said there's no plowing in the Torah on Shabbos, you're allowed to plow on Shabbos. Is that called uprooting an entire mitzvah, and therefore there's no par helen dav tzibur? Or is that called uprooting? Or, or maybe since they agreed to the concept of Shabbos, they agreed to the concept of Shabbos, so they agreed to Shabbos. They're just saying that this Lamites Malacha doesn't apply, so that's not called uprooting Shabbos, and that's called a Kiyam mitzvahs ubitul mitzvahs. Boya Reb Zera asked the question, what happened in Shabbos with Shviyas? Bezdin said, you don't have to keep Shabbos during the Shemitah year, Mahu. But Mato, how could Bezdin make such a mistake? B'Hadenkra, the Bezdin found a pasuk. B'charish of a tishbis. The Torah tells you on Shemitah, you're never allowed to plow. You're not allowed to cut, harvest. So Bisman the Ika Charisha, if you could do that during the weekday Ika Shabbos, then there's a concept of Shabbos. Ubisman the Leka Charisha, during the time of Shemitah where there is no plowing, Leka Shabbos. There is no Shabbos. So what happens? Bezdin said, on Shemitah year, you don't have to keep Shabbos. But so, mi amrina, kiven the Mekayim lebeshar shnei shvua, since they agree the concept of Shabbos during other years, right? So then, kibitul mitzvahs v'kiyam mitzvahs dami. That's like keeping a mitzvah and nullifying a mitzvah. Oidilma or absolving a mitzvah. Oidilma kiven the ka'akrele b'shvius. But maybe you could look at it this way. They're telling you there's no Shabbos during the Shemitah yet. Ka'kiris guf dami. It's like they're uprooting an entire mitzvah. Amar Ravina said, Tashma, come in here. Novi shinisnabe laka dova medivrei Torah. A novi that just made a prophecy that you don't have to keep a mitzvah. Chaya. Then he's liable. Levitul mitzvahs, l'kiyah mitzvahs. If he said you have to keep this mitzvah, but part of the mitzvah you don't have to do. Rab Shimon Amar Potter. Regarding avodah zarah, afilu ama hayom avdet. Let's say he tells you serve avodah zarah on Sundays, or machar and Mondays bitla. You don't have to. You should not keep your worship avodah zarah. You worship God. Chayev. Then he's a false navi. Shmamina. So we see from there, ein Shabbos b'shviyas. If they say there is no Shabbos during the Shemitah year, but they agree that there is a concept of Shabbos in 6 other years. That's kibitul mitzvahs, v'kiyah mitzvahs, damei shmamino. That's like nullifying a mitzvah, part of a mitzvah, and keeping a mitzvah. So that would obligate Bezdin to bring a par helem dava shotzibar. New Mishnah. Hori Bezdin, if they paskin Bezdin, v'yoda echem mehem sheto, and one of the Bezdins didn't agree to the 71. V'amalehem time natim, you're all making a mistake. So then they don't have a unanimous vote. Oi. So then there's no par helam dava shel tziba. Oy shloi haya mufla shel bezdin sham. Or if let's say they had the 71 people, but the main guy of Bezdin was on vacation, so they found a replacement for him. Or let's say one of the 71 should have been retired because he wasn't worthy to be part of the Bezdin. He's there now because we don't have a replacement for him, but he should not be part of the Bezdin. For example, he's a mamzer, or let's say he's an old person. It seems to me that he can't have children anymore. So, and we need somebody to be able to have children in order to be part of Bezdin, because we darshan that v'shaftu Eida, that you have to be somebody that's worthy to have children. So, hareze potter, there's no par helam davashot tzibor. Shnema kan Eida, v'nema lahala and Eida. It says in Parsha Shoftim regarding giving somebody the death penalty, v'shaftu Eida v'tzilu Eida. Ma Eida amur lahan and kulim roi lahedrar. Just like the Eida that it says regarding in Parsha Shoftim, it's talking about everybody on the capital punishment judiciary um, on the judgment is appropriate to be there. Af Eda Hamurakan. So also the judge, the group of judges that it's written by Par Helam Davashur Tzibar, Achi Hey Kulim Ru'in Laira. Everybody of those 71 have to be somebody who's supposed to be there. Not one of them is somebody who's not worthy to be part of the Bezdin. We learned in the Mishnah if the main guy of Bezin wasn't there present when the Bezin made the psak, then even though you have 71 and they all agreed to one psak, but the main guy wasn't there, he was on vacation, so then there is no par helam davas shiba. So Manolan, how do you know you need the main guy there? Amrav Shesa v'chein tanu b'rei b'shmol v'neima amru choydim b'zover shatstukim moedim by peturim. Why did the Chazal say that if the Bezdin made a mistake in something that even a Bible reader would know about, and the peturim, then Bezdin, then there is no par helam davar shatziba, b'pnei shahoyelem l'lmay v'lei lamdu. They could have opened up a chumash and read it, and they didn't. So it's such an obvious mistake. So that there is no power helam dava shatziba. Loy hoya mufla shel bezdin sham nami peturim lamdo. If the main guy wasn't there, since he could have always straightened everybody out because he's the smartest person in the room and he wasn't present, so therefore there is no power helam dava shatziba. Nema sham eda v'nema lahei akan eda ache kulim ru'in lahei ra. We need that anybody who's part of Bezdin has to be appropriate for the Bezdin. That means it can't be somebody who's on the Bezdin, but he's not supposed to be there. Also minolam, Damrav Chizda, Amakravi, Svatsu Sham Imach. Imach b'daimelach. They told Moshe that we get a Sanhedrin, and they should be there with you. So we darshan imach b'daim lecha, that anybody who's part of Moshe's court or was appointed has to be similar to Moshe, somebody who's the right person for the job. Says the Gemara ve'ema imach b'shchina. Maybe the Torah meant to say that he should get people who could have God's presence on them, but not somebody who is appropriate to judge. You see, you can be a tzaddik and God could rest your presence on you, but not somebody who knows how to issue psak. Elam Rav Nachman Amar Yitzchak Bar Yitzchak Rav Nachman Yitzchak said Amar Kra. The pasuk says in Parshas Yisroi, V'nasi Itcha. When Moshe appointed the Sanhedrin, the pasuk says they carried the laws with Moshe. Itcha b'daim lecha. These were people that were similar to Moshe, that they know how to paskin. So bottom line is, because it says Ada, and it says by Moshe Rabbeinu, when he selected a Sanhedrin, it was Ada. The Ada that was written by Moshe Rabbeinu were people who were similar to Moshe Rabbeinu. They knew how to paskin. So also the Ada that it's written in by Par Helam Davar Shatzim called Adas in Yisrael, where it was referring to people who are appropriate to be on the Bezdin. And therefore, anybody who's a ger, mamza, inosen is not somebody who is appropriate to paskin, even though if he's on the Bezdin, if he so happened to be on the Bezdin, there would not be a din of par helim davo shel tzibar. Okay, a good Shabbos, everybody.